Welcome back to another episode of Universal Gaming. I'm your host, Paula Brandt. Today we're going to explore the card game Flux, the game with ever-changing rules, and we're going to interview Chris Johnson about character creation for the game Terrors and Tactics. It's a new role-play game in development. If you have any comments or questions, please email me at brandtp23@yahoo.com. Flux is a game of ever-changing rules. It's created by Looney Labs, and it can get kind of confusing and the rules change a lot. I'm going to explain the basic game today. There's different versions of the game. They are standalone sets. You cannot mix them together. There's different sets like Pirates, Zombies, Math, Firefly, Adventure Time. Family Flux is for ages 6 and up. Most of the sets are ages 8 and up, and it's 2 to 6 players. Like I said, it's a standalone game with ever-changing rules, and I'm going to show you the basic game today. The different cards that you'll find in the game. First off, there's the basic rules card. You're going to draw one and play one. If you change a rule, which is a yellow card with a yellow on the side here, that is going to be a rule card that changes your basic rule. It's going to say draw 3, play 1, or draw 1, play 3, or draw 2, play all, or something along those lines. And they can get kind of complicated. There's also goal cards. They're pink on the side. When you play a goal card, the goal card is what you need to win the game. In this case, chocolate cookies. You would need the chocolate keeper and the cookies keeper. The keeper cards are green. You play those in front of you during your play step, and if they're on the table and they meet the goal, then you win. So if you had the rocket, you would need a goal that says rocket. It's pretty straightforward. But you also have action cards, which are blue. Like, for example, they will say rules reset, where you take all of the yellow rules cards that you played on top of the basic rule, you take those all off the table. It's a great card. There's also draw 2 and use one of them, where you do what the card says. You put your hand aside, draw 2, use one of them. There's other cards in the game like creepers. You cannot win the game if a creeper is in play, and it says on the card what you must do. For this one, it's taxes. You cannot hold this card, but you must place it up on the table as soon as you get it, and you draw another card to replace it. You cannot win if you have this unless the goal says otherwise. So there's other cards that'll let you trade it to another person or something like that. We're going to start playing. I have my son Devin here, and like I said, you're going to start with the draw 1, play 1 basic rules card. You draw 3 cards off your deck, off the top of your deck. Each player gets 3 cards. Go ahead and look at your hand, bud. Yay. And we're going to start playing. On your turn, you draw a card and you play a card as the basic rule says until that changes. I'm going to go first. I'm going to draw a card. Then I'm going to play a card. I'm going to play draw 3 onto my basic rule. So now it's draw 3, play 1. Now I immediately draw 2 more cards because it was draw 3 and I only drew 1. So now I drew radioactive potato creeper. You cannot hold this card. You must place it up in front of you. Immediately draw another card to replace it. You cannot win if you have this. Why do I always get the radioactive potato?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Okay. Then for my play, I'm going to play chocolate in front of me. There's no goal out right at the moment. Devin's turn. Draw a card.
Okay.
There's your card.
Okay then.
It's draw 3, play 1. So I'm sorry, you draw 3 cards. Play 1. There's your other 2. Now what are you going to play? You can play a creeper. You can play a keeper in front of you. You can play a goal. but you only play one. The rules are currently play one.
I don't like my starting hand.
You don't
because
like
it
your
starts
starting
off,
hand.
off with a creeper.
Starts with death. Okay, so then you can draw a card because it said you have to place that creeper in front of you. And now you can do your play because the creeper doesn't count as a play.
Ooh, yay.
What are you going to do, bud?
Goal card.
Goal. All that is certain. This one you need death and taxes. And taxes. Okay, 2 creepers. My turn. Draw 3, play 1, because that's what the rules are right now. So 1, 2, 3, and I get to play 1. I'm going to play the rocket. So I have chocolate, the rocket, and the radioactive potato. That was my 1 play. It's your turn. Draw 3, play 1. Here's your 3, play 1. So play 1.
Play 1. I'm gonna use my action.
Action. Jackpot. Draw 3 cards. All right. Now we're going to place that action on the discard pile. Okay, that was your 1 play, and it's still draw 3, play 1. My turn. Draw 3, play 1. Okay. I'm going to rules reset. Action card. It resets all the rules. So now I take off all these yellow cards off of my basic rule, and it goes back to draw 1, play 1. That was my 1 play. Your turn. Draw 1 card, play 1.
Okay. I draw the card.
All right. You get to play 1.
And I win the game.
Oh,
Because of the goal.
you've
I
got
have death and taxes, which is the goal.
death
I win
and
the
taxes. You win. Good job, buddy. As you can see, this game gets kind of confusing because if the rules change to say draw all or play all, or there's a limit to how many keepers are on the table, or there can be, there's also one goal where it's all you need is love, and if you have the heart, then you would win. But it's a very cute game. The Family Flux version of this game is, like I said, is for ages 6 and up. It's a smaller deck, and it doesn't have any of these creepers in it. You can also take the creepers out if you decide that that's too difficult or more strategy for your liking. There's also cards in the game called meta rules, and it'll say on the card what it does, but it'll also say what cards are involved with that meta rule. And the meta rule cards, you have to all agree on that rule, and you take those cards out if you don't want to play with that card in the game.
Hey,
But
Mom.
thank you for joining us. We'll do another demonstration of another game soon. Welcome back. Role-play games are very popular, and I'm here with the creator of Terrors and Tactics, Siege Johnson. Thank you for joining us again.
Hi.
In a previous episode of Universal Gaming, we discussed what Terrors and Tactics is and why you went into this. This time we're just going to go into character creation in this vast and interesting world with all these different characters you can make. I made a character, but the rules have changed since then. How do we make it, just the bare bones, how do we make a character start?
Well, to start off with, and this is kind of hard for people in a sense, that when I say sky's the limit, that I have all sorts of options for things, but generally it helps to kind of narrow things down. One of the things I like to do is kind of give people kind of targeted choices on things. So let's start with something easy here. This is kind of the order that I give for things of picking a species. And I call them species, not races, because, well, a dragon and a human are not the same race.
Yeah.
They're completely different beasts from each other. But in any event, is your character human? Are they a near human? Are they something completely inhuman? When you think about what sort of character you want to come up with, what do you want to come up with? There's about 10 different basic species, if you will, in the game. I call them avatars, beastmen, dwarves, elves, gnomes, golems, humans, Malfians, and mutants. But inside of those, each one of them has a whole plethora of options to it.
And I think I chose a beast man, correct? Because this is a centaur.
Yeah, and I'll just read the little brief description here. There's a much more elaborate one in the species section, but just kind of in brief, they're an array of species: centaurs, crocodile, kobolds, minotaurs, wolfen, etc., that were created, and that in the implied setting of the thing were slaves created by the First Empire. And through revolution and an alliance with the astral gods, they won their freedom and have maintained their fierce independence ever since. Now, you don't have to use that setting. If you wanted to play, say, a pre-existing setting, you could adapt them to whatever you wanted it to be. But in the basic setting for this, they are essentially a whole plethora of things. So the default setting exists to kind of spark ideas for people to hit off of. If you have better ideas that fit what you want to do better, go with that.
Helps you tell the story.
But in any case, you chose a beastman, and as I recall, you chose a specific type that when you go into that, you've got various benefits that they provide. In the case of the beastmen, it's literally kind of a build your own species, because there are so many different types that trying to come up with, well, this is the minotaur species, this is the kobold species, all of those, to give a specific background to each one of them, because I like background, I like the story element
You could really come
of
up
it.
with that on your own.
Well, yeah, you can. And another part of it is just that it would needlessly fill space to have just where there's only slight differences between things, it would just needlessly fill up space. So in any event, you chose a centaur, which meant in this case there was actually a sample version. I include a number of species, things like centaurs, things like minotaurs, kobolds, crocodile, as I call them, instead of lizard men, but they're basically crocodile men, raven men. There are examples of those that I give in there for people who just want to pick a specific, pretty common species in there. These are the options that you would take to get that. But
And I picked a centaur that shapeshifts into a crocodile.
well,
I
you're
believe.
getting a bit ahead of yourself.
Getting
here.
ahead of myself.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
sorry.
the next step.
Okay, next step.
The next step is your archetype and your class. Archetype kind of goes back to original D&D, where there were only two classes. There was the fighting man and there was the magic user. I kind of make that distinction in my game as well, in that, are you a skilled archetype, somebody who relies on their wits and their training and generally weapons and things like that? Or are you a spellcaster? Are you somebody who uses magic in some form? Now, each of those has further breakdowns underneath of that. That's where your class comes in. And because it's a team-based game, I went with different types of roles that you can play, and they're kind of based off of the classic D&D ones. You've got your tank, your fighter, if you will, is the kind of the tank. They keep the enemy occupied so that they aren't attacking other people, and they've got the defenses and the beefiness to stand up to that. You've got your controller, who kind of debuffs the enemy and things like that. You've got your enabler, who helps out the party, gives them buffs, keeps their edge scores up, things like that. And then finally you've got the slayer, as I call them, who's primary purpose is dealing out a lot of damage.
Damage.
So each of those archetypes has a number of classes underneath them that explore those options. There are two types of actual shapeshifters in mind that I had, which were the shifter specifically, who focused more on doing a lot of damage, that essentially they take their shape-shifting and they focus on predatory beasts and things like that actually will tear through the enemy. Classic ability name I have for them is based off of old D&D things where they talk about monsters. I call their thing that lets them make multiple attacks Claw, Claw, Bite, because that's what they used to call it. I call it, and why not call it something that's evocative like that? The other option was what I call the Protector, who they transform themselves into something that's more like the wall that's standing between the enemy and you. You like, I'm turning myself into an iron golem. Actually think, Colossus is not a bad, from the X-Men, is not a bad example of that. I use magic and I turn myself into this steel wall that stands between you, between your party and your enemies, and you soak up the hits.
And I think that's one of the main points that makes this game so interesting, is that there's so many options if you put your mind to it. You've got so many bases covered as far as imagination goes. You could make pretty much anything.
Yeah, backing up a little bit to the skilled archetype, just because it's equally valid and important as the spellcasters, is that just because you're a guy with a sword and a shield and heavy armor doesn't mean you have to be the tank. You could be a guy who's specialized in maneuvering through the battlefield, disabling people. It could be you're the charismatic captain type who says, get up and keep fighting. It could be you're just the guy who just cleaves through people like a hot knife through butter. By the same token, you could be somebody who is lightly armored or even unarmored and is doing those same roles, but instead of doing it with a shield and heavy armor, they're in light armor with a rapier or a bow and arrow, or even some type of steampunk pistol type of thing. There's no reason that just because you want to fill a certain role, you can't have the concept that you want for how your character fights. And that's really what the archetypes and classes are all about, is how does your character solve problems when they are in a fight? So in your case, I believe you picked, it was the shifter, the more combat-focused one who did lots of damage, and you kind of decided with the abilities that you got, because they got different abilities based on what they could choose to shapeshift into, and you start off with a few forms. As you gain levels, you gain additional forms or additional abilities that you could use with that, and you can also choose whether or not you turn fully into an animal or whether you just take on traits of the ant.
Like maybe just the claws or in the head.
Just the claws, or as you described it, you're a centaur who picks up the scales
if
and
you can zoom in on this.
Scales and other features of a crocodile, but are still essentially centaur shaped. And that's fine. That's awesome, actually. That's something unique that you came up with that's really cool. And I want to encourage things like that with the options that people have. But again, that's just how your character is fighting. The next step to that, though, is picking a background, because every character comes from somewhere, and I think one of the things that I think sets my system apart from other systems for a lot of things is that I did not tie a lot of non-combat things to the classes. Just because you can change into a crocodile or something like that, that doesn't mean that you have a particular focus to your skills or things like that. You could have come at it through arcane magic, where you're a bookworm and you learned how to do this. You could have come through it in you're a military background where you learned this as part of combat magic as part of some formal army or group of people like that. That there's a whole set of things. The example I use is the barbarian. That it's so stereotyped in D&D as the big, strong, illiterate, axe-wielding guy. But really, in terms of culturally what barbarians were they were just the outsiders on the borderlands. They might have been a bit more tribal than the more civilized people and things like that. Civilized in quotes.
And the one that I put from understanding that was just, I just thought of beast spirit and picking the spirit
they might be,
and things.
Yeah, they might have more totem-related things. But the point being that essentially backgrounds in this are what determine your skills, what you're good at doing, and they also give you a lot of what I call utility options, which are essentially abilities that you gain as you level that let you do certain things better that are associated with that. So, for example, with barbarians, you might get things like being able to move faster through rough terrain that you're familiar with. You might get the ability to being really good at foraging or knowing herbal medicine or being hard to track in the wilderness.
And this is based on your background, in this case, barbarian.
Yeah, just as an example, because that's what you picked. You could have things like being good at building traps. You could even, and this is one of the things I kind of liked about the older editions of D&D, was where followers was a big thing, and having additional people that you picked up as you leveled, because you're kind of a hero and a leader of men type of thing. So warband is one of the things where you pick up a group of loyal warriors who come from your tribe.
Maybe I should add that to my character. Just
could be. But different ones have different things. Like if you take a background like a noble or courtier or something like that, that you could pick up a bodyguard, because those sort of things are important to that. You need the guy watching your back when you're dealing with stuff in a corrupt king's court.
That's, and like I said before, that's what's so interesting about Terrors of Tactics. There's so many different ways that you could come up with your character and do so many different things that you can't imagine in these other editions. And you've told me that you really appreciate the playtesters and what they've done to help. And their feedback.
They found so many loopholes and things. I've got a bit of it's not published yet, but I'm going to be putting it up online pretty shortly. It's essentially a blog that I've been kind of doing through a obscure forum at the moment that kind of covers where they've found various problems. And so I'm going to put a lot of that up. But then the other related part after that is just you still have attributes and ability scores, things like that, but I have those kind of determined near the end after you've figured out what your character needs to be good at.
What you need to be good at.
That's when you go through and you figure out what things
the numbers
you need.
The numbers you need, and the
big
dice
thing
you
I
need.
pride myself on with these classes and things are that every single species has some way to do all of the classes in it.
Well, a lot of people like to play classes differently, and I think that's what's so great about this, is that you could do whatever you can think of, you could find a way to make it in this.
Yeah,
and it's very hard to do it in other editions.
Yeah.
And I thank you for joining us, and we'll have you back some other time to talk about this in more detail.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us on Universal Gaming. If you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like us to come out and interview you about your game, or if you're looking for players, let me know. My email is brantp23@yahoo.com. Thanks for joining us. See you on the flip side. Hold on. Go down in there and show me. You've got creepers in a TNT house. Hold still. Alright, go fly back up. Evan, fly back out. Look, go off to the side and look at it from afar. Go down a little. That's cool. That would be cool if you could blow it up.